So our final discussion this morning is a panel with members of AfriCOBRA, African Commune of Bad Relevant Artists, in conversation with art historian Romi Crawford. Romi is Associate Professor in the Visual and Critical Studies and Liberal Arts Department at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I am thrilled to welcome her today to moderate a conversation with four members of AfriCOBRA, artists Jae Jarrell, Wadsworth Jarrell, Carolyn Lawrence, and Gerald Williams. Please join me in welcoming all for this discussion.
Hi, good morning. Thank you all for being here. So we have a wonderful panel, but there are a lot of us, and there's one panel member who is on their way here. She will be here in a moment, Carolyn. But we'll get started. I want to thank you all. I think a thank you is in order for the curators, the institutions, the funders, and everyone who's been involved in making this happen. It's a really wholly gratifying opportunity to see this work. And I think coupled with that, it's equally gratifying to be able to hear from the artists in their own voice about their work and themselves. So Gerald, Jae, Wadsworth, and Carolyn Lawrence, who's going to be over there on the side end, to hear what they have to say about their practice, about their involvement in AfriCOBRA in their own words is sort of really what we're up to this afternoon. And I think Zoe and other people have mentioned that was really an important project of the exhibit, but also in some of the discussions and dialogues. So let's see, where is the clicker? There it goes, mute space. All right. So we're going to get started, 45 minutes, and for artists who have a lot to say, lots of experience, long history. So we'll get right to it. One of the interesting, I think, tensions here, or in a great way, is that you are all part of AfriCOBRA, right? Founding members in some way or another. And so that implies that you work collaboratively and as a collective, you know, as a method. That's been a major part of how you produce work. And yet, I'd like for each of you to discuss your own work and practice in an individuated way. I'd love for each of you to just get us started by anchoring your own work, again, in your own words. Those of us who frame and think about your work have our ways of doing that, but I'd love to hear what each of you have to say about your practice. So what we've done is Gerald and Carolyn and Jae and Wadsworth have each selected one slide, and I'll try to get to that slide. And then we can, let's see, there we go. Let's start with you, Gerald, this work, and if you could just anchor your practice vis-a-vis this painting.
I can see most of, first of all, I'm really thrilled to be here. It's been a long journey that began a half century ago, or better. The painting that you see here is called Panthers and Pigs, completed sometime 1967, 68. The backstory takes some time, but I'll be brief with it. I was parking my car in the garage after work. I worked full-time and attended the Art Institute and Chicago City College at the same time. So ordinary day, came home, and a police car pulled up behind me and wanted to know what I was doing in this neighborhood. And I said, well, I live here. You know, all my halcyon days were spent here. And I said, well, you know, so why did you stop me? Well, you look suspicious. And I said, well, tell me more. So he had me turn around and patted me down and stuck his hand in my pocket. and asked me why I was so nervous. It was almost 0 that evening, 0 degrees. And as you can imagine, you're not being casual outside with no coat on in 0 weather. Fast forward to my finally getting in the house, and my father was there. And he had never seen me angry. Of all of my 10 siblings, I would probably be the least to really come loose. And I looked at him like, well, I hope you don't call the police. At any rate, he said, well, it's a good thing you got mad inside rather than out in the alley. Mm-hmm. Because true to today, I might not be around to be sitting here. Yeah. And that was, I'm sure that I may not be alone among the folks in this room in having to go through that humiliating experience.
So those personal experiences were very much impacted and influenced the production of the work.
I think sometimes is part of that war that exists within a lot of us. These paintings were the result of that rage. The Panthers and the Pigs. The Black Panther Party at that time was causing quite a stir, as you probably recall from history. And I attended rallies, read about the Black Panthers in the newspaper, and the rage was there, and it came out in these this painting, and there are 2 others that were done at the same time. This was at about the same time as my getting involved with these 2 people, mm-hmm. Wadsworth and Jae.
So was that 68? Was that 68?
67, 68. Okay. We shared a building that housed our studios. And somewhere down the road, we encountered Jeff Donaldson and Barbara Jones, mm-hmm. Hogu, and a couple of other artists in the area. We started having meetings once a week, and one led to the other, and eventually in 1968, a half a century ago, we became AfriCOBRA. And there were some intermittent steps.
I love, Gerald, that you went from anchoring and talking about your own practice and work to AfriCOBRA, because again, I think that that's a really important aspect of why you all are here. Certainly influences the work. But before we go into a further discussion of AfriCOBRA, let's actually move to what maybe I think Carolyn has to say about her work.
Let's go back one.
Oh, I'm sorry, let's go to Wadsworth. Yeah, that's the, okay. We're a little bit out of order that we originally had. So Wadsworth.
Okay. My interest in art started when I was, a kid drawing cartoons, comic strips, and didn't know his cars and different things. And occasionally, then I moved into landscapes with watercolor. And I didn't live in the city of Athens, Georgia. Well, it's a city now, but it was a town. About 30,000 people in Athens, Georgia, where the University of Georgia is located. So there was no art in Athens at all, especially for African Americans. Although they had a museum at the University of Georgia opened in 1945, and it became open to the public in 1948, but African Americans couldn't visit, so there was no real art there, but nevertheless I was moved into painting and to watercolor, and then eventually into oils. And my father was a furniture maker, and he did upholstery, refinishing, repair, and he also sold antiques. And my mother was basically a homemaker that had sewing skills, and you know, she made clothes and quilts and you know, the general things that a lot of people in that area of the South did was quilting. They would get together and do quilting and stuff. So when I went to high school, I was still I was always the only artist most places I went. In high school, I became the illustrator for the school paper. And I was also the business manager. I went out and got all the ads for the paper. Then I was drafted into the military after I got out of high school. You know, a couple of years later, I was drafted into the military. And I became the battery artist for the military for the next 2 years. I was in 24 months. And that was the required time for draftees at the time. So, except I wasn't really doing art the whole 24 months. I did it for 17 months. And then I got transferred to combat in Korea. And then I had to do what my MOS was, you know, what my job was, you know, I was working in a heavy field artillery company. So actually I got out and got out of the military in 1953, and I moved to Chicago where two of my sisters and a brother lived. And I taught at the night school at Ray Vogue School of Art, and then I went 1 year at night there, and I went to the Art Institute of Art, School of Art Institute the next 4 years, full time. And when I got out, I was doing street scenes, bar scenes, horse races, all of these kind of things, in different ethnic neighborhoods, not only African American neighborhoods. That was my early paintings, and they were deep space paintings with creating a lot of space. And so later in 1963, I moved into this huge studio that had skylights and everything. It was just like, when I saw it, I just thought of seeing these kind of things in the movie. And it just blew my mind, and it hadn't been lived in 8 years. And it had a lot of history to it, which I didn't know at the time, but it was built for a sculpture.
Was it on the south side of Chicago? Or?
Yes, at 61st and Harper, south side of Chicago. It was built for a sculptor that was in the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. And the whole studio, it was double studios with a brick wall going between them with open arches in it. And it was 2 stories tall, with one studio was 30 by 30, 2 stories tall, and one was 15 by 30, 2 stories tall. So an artist came in and changed the studio. He put a floor between one of the studios, and he installed a kitchen and a half bath downstairs. And upstairs, he had a bedroom with his own bath inside the bedroom. So
this is all, excuse me, this is prior to AfriCOBRA?
This was prior to AfriCOBRA.
Okay, right, the lead up.
And you know, everybody, and Jay and I remodeled it, did some remodeling on it. Really nice things with raw wood. The whole thing was made out of brick and wood. It was and concrete floors, except for upstairs I had a wooden floor. So Jay and I did some work on it, and then we got married, and then, you know, everybody knew about my studio. A lot of artists had been in it and out, and Gerald was next door, in a studio next door to it, which we called a big studio. He was in the 30 by 30 foot, 2-story tall studio. So then we decided well, in the beginning, I guess we did 1967. Jeff Donaldson was part of founders of OBASI, which was Organization of Black American Culture. And Jeff Donaldson was the only artist in it. Everybody was poets or scientists or college teachers and things that started OBASI, and writers. So he was the visual artist, so he formed the visual, we was the visual art part of the OBASI, which created the Wall of Respect, which got more publicity than anything that came out of the OBASI. So,
Right, so that was 67.
That was 1967.
Okay.
This is a mural, a large mural on an outdoor building, and we was told that we were the first people to create a mural on the outside building in modern times in America. So then it spread all over the country and all over the world. Murals popped up. Even some Wall of Respects popped up.
Right. And of course, the Wall of Respect is an interesting case too. As you mentioned, OBASI was a collective of sorts, right? The Organization of Black American Culture, AfriCOBRA is a collective as well. So this really, this sort of spirit and interest in working collaboratively was really de rigueur at that time. Let me see if we can just, let's see whose slide is that next. I don't know why we have to, we're losing Carolyn's. Jay, could you ground your work and let people know that you are the person who makes these wonderful, radical fashion suits? We'll talk about that.
Thank you. Thank you. This is our first project in AfriCOBRA. When we founding members drew together to form the collective, we worked together and studied the news around the Black communities all over the world. And it was obvious that we thought we had something to contribute. We weren't quite sure where we wanted to go with it, but as we talked about conditions and visited every week or a couple of weeks on Sunday afternoons, we found that the artists had a responsibility that we wanted to achieve, and that would be the visual reaction to what is happening to our nation and our people. And as a result, after chatting for probably almost a year and a half, there came a time when you had to really produce something. We thought by the time we got to 68, near the December time, we got an invitation from a TV program that was aware of AfriCOBRA, and it was a community program. They invited us to show and be interviewed one Sunday morning. And we, quick like a bunny, decided we needed an idea that was collaborating. What could we do that would be powerful, informational, and beautiful? We had put together our principles of Kool-Aid colors with the C.
Is that a bit of a correction?
Yeah.
Yes.
For those of you who think, it's,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
not Kool-Aid.
we don't invade franchises, anything of that sort. We're very savvy when it comes to that.
And ADE.
So, okay.
ADE the
And
word.
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
ADE, yeah.
And Wadsworth reminds me, and ADE as its ending.
Rather than AID,
Right.
ADE.
Right.
Okay, so from now on, you know how to spell Kool-Aid.
Kool-Aid.
Kool-Aid for Kool-Aid colors.
Everybody who writes about it,
Write
get
it
this
down.
right.
Be informed.
Yeah.
We chose the Black family. That was, to us, the most threatened collaboration that existed in our midst. And we needed to assure power and uplift. And where better than at the beginning? We all know our beginnings, and it would be very good to foresee a beauty, an image that we had chosen to use a poster type concept to do our art so that it was like banners going through the community. So this is my ebony family, and it's a combination of cut-up fabrics that constitute the material to make a dashiki, and boasts of father, mother, very supportive young brother, and very dependent young baby that father clutches. To me, the E and the F was to continue our poster concept, which is to put words in our work, oftentimes to steer you, so you don't necessarily read into our work your ideas, but understand our ideas.
Right, right.
And so we very blatantly say a lot of things in AfriCOBRA.
I have a question about the blatantness. How formal was this? I mean, you just listed things that are really kind of lead us to think about your work as a genre, right? The poster form, certain color, the Kool-Aid color, correction on how that's spelled, the words that show up within the posters, obviously the text, and these themes like family, which will show up in Carolyn's work when we talk about that in a minute. How codified was that? How much did you all really sort of write that down, or not write it down, but sort of speak it daily in a daily way, and sort of make it really clear as a collaborative group that those were some of the tenets?
These are the issues that we visited during that period of time of development, noting mostly principles that we thought were good to adopt, that may or may not exist in every piece of work, but perhaps visited in one person's work in one emphasis. I tend to be very family-oriented. You know, my picture out on the wall when we come in is cuddling one and handing the hands of another, and secretly there's another one in the old patch. So
let's see if we can get to Carolyn's.
This is my direction, and I believe that it was a kind of way that I could adopt my my talent in clothing and express myself in the community and with a collective.
Great, thank you. I'm wondering if you could get us to our first slide, which was Carolyn's, and Carolyn, maybe if we can finish up, there it goes. Black children, keep your spirits free. Obviously, it relates to what Jae is just talking about, a sort of key theme within AfriCOBRA, and definitely a bossy, and sort of showed up a lot in the activity at the Wall of Respect, where people were bringing their families and their children to the site. Could you anchor your practice?
Yes. We all had themes that we would do work around, but I thought it would be good to focus on children because I wanted to foster family solidarity, racial pride, and certainly self-determination and confidence in each other. So I came up with the idea to do one with children moving, having a good time, and of course, along with the Kool-Aid colors, the space is used subjectively, and the words are repeated in a very rhythmic way, and along with other symbols to deliver the message directly. We were unapologetically using words, and there's a frontality of the figures and a directness in their position and the way that they greet the audience. And I certainly thought children would enjoy seeing a mask as a reminder and a connection of their own heritage. I think children are just normally full of energy, and we adults need to give them small lessons in self-control along the way, because they need that in order to have discipline in their lives, and that discipline is needed to develop their own natural abilities. And at the same time, we need to keep encouraging them to just keep their own little kooky ways and be fresh and respond and also be spontaneous. And that we all need, especially as we age. I'm very, very concerned about how our imagery affects our lives, not just the young, but the rest of us as well. Our imageries or our images are a healing force against negative images, and that are an assault upon our minds, and particularly the minds of Black people. These images breed self-doubt, identity confusion, and self-hate. The more aware, or unaware, a Black person is about the strength of their character and other Blacks, past and present, the more easily their minds or our minds can be manipulated. Our images reinforce what is already naturally authentic about us and what calls us to love ourselves. I was just thrilled when I met and found AfriCOBRA artist. I'm a transplant from Houston, Texas, and I had come out of college just to find a job up here, and worked a little over about 5 years or 6 years in the Gary, Indiana school system, and then I transferred to the Chicago school system and worked there until I retired in 2001. So I had not had a lot of experience interacting with other artists, and I was just hungry for people who had the same interests, who had points of view, who were willing to explore ideas and concepts, and had the same kind of challenges. So this has just been a wonderful opportunity for me to be a part of this group.
Thank you, Carolyn. And I think those are really fantastic, remarks. not only did I think a lot of us, I certainly learned a lot from you all speaking about your work in this way, things that I did not necessarily know prior to this, and then, although I even know a little bit about this work and this field. But one thing that comes up here is this notion of conceptualism, and I think it's undervalued and under-discussed in terms of your practices. There's a lot of sort of conceptual heft and a lot of conceptual thinking, a lot of conceptual backgrounding to the painting. And so I think that your comments help to flesh some of that out. One of the questions I had, within contemporary arts conversations and discourses, site, location, regionality, all of that, it plays large. Placemaking, I think in Chicago, we think about this a lot in terms of placemaking. And I think I know the last time I saw you all was actually just 2 weeks ago for two events that were both beautiful in their own way, the memorial for Barbara Jones Hogu, and then also the exhibition for Barbara Jones Hogu that's at DePaul University now. And so this is like, I'm citing Chicago. We were all in Chicago, and you all have some connection to Chicago. You've all mentioned Chicago. I think the show, in a very wonderful and important way, expresses a region, right? The Soul of a Nation show. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago has a little moment, that sort of thing. Other places, of course, have significance as well, but Chicago. How much does that particular time and place, maybe now we're the 60s, of Chicago, your AfriCOBRA moment, you've all sort of alluded to it. How much does that impact the work?
AfriCOBRA was, Chicago was very political, and it was an ethnic city. It's the largest city in America, and it's the most residentially segregated city in America. So you had ethnic areas where people live. Anyway, it was very political, and we saw a need to create a new language. In the past, new languages are always created by white artists, mostly white males. So we decided we wanted to create a new language, a new aesthetic, which we named the Black aesthetic. And this was our goal in AfriCOBRA. We had two women and 3 men who was the founding members. And we didn't consider the women artists. We considered them artists. They had equal rights as we had in the group. It was a cohesive group. We was a family. And we talked politics, and we met for 2 years before we ever exhibited. And our first major exhibit really was the Studio Museum in Harlem in 1970. But we formed a philosophy in those 2 years, and we had principles. And one was the Kool-Aid colors. We wanted to revolutionize color, not just use it conventionally like people use it, like skin tones and all of this stuff. We didn't recognize that, so we decided to take another avenue on the use of color. And Chicago was very impactful for everything was created really in the gritty neighborhoods of the Black community in Chicago.
So it was a Black aesthetic. Would you say it was a Chicago Black aesthetic, or related at all? Maybe Gerald or?
Chicago is a tough city. I think most Chicagoans will tell you that. For some people, there's the reality that you have to leave your home in the morning prepared for a fight of some kind. Now, I'm not talking about, fighting your neighbor, but it's the way things are done sometimes in just transacting business. People are tough-minded. Businessmen are tough-minded. Carl Sandburg speaks about that in his poem, about the city of broad shoulders and the toughness of the city. So competition is at the heart of just about everything that you have to do in a town like, in a city like that. And certainly the art world may have been a characteristic of that kind of toughness. We were in basically a hermetically sealed area in the South Side with very little interaction with the mainstream art community in the city. There were a handful of galleries that some of the artists circulated through. But that was, the reality that we discussed in our meetings. Well, do we really need to associate with the major galleries? Let's produce what we have to produce within our own universe. And I think that really helped to strengthen us. Yeah. We're talking roughly about 5 years.
I'm wondering if you all could take us through what a meeting was like. One of the things I learned in doing the Wall of Respect research is that, as you all know, there were these amazing sort of images of the meetings, and doing some research now in Festac, and there are these amazing images of the Chicago contingent before going to Festac of the meetings in homes. So I'm curious, what were some of the other alternative strategies happening in the 60s, from 67 to maybe 72 or something? In addition, the Wall of Respect, of course, was one of those strategies, which you just spoke to Wadsworth about, getting out in the street, showing work in other ways. Gerald, you mentioned this, you're not connected to mainstream institutions, so how else can one make work, show the work? In Soul of the Nation, there's, again, this art in the streets moment, right? But were there some strategies that we don't know about that are a little bit more under radar for how you all got your work out or showed work?
Right. We were a commune. We holed up in the WJ studios and spent long hours of our Sundays being together, just talking about conditions, talking about articles, some incidents that may have shaped us, having to do with Panthers and Watts and just different areas, and people would bring clippings and we'd talk about it and how might that be how could we affect something positive from these conditions. But as we began to develop principles, it gave us a path out of any darkness. And it was decided that what we had to do was uplift. No matter what, the uplift could be generated from color, will always be bright and bright colors of rays from sunshine, But so that's one reason why you get into a room of an AfriCOBRA exhibit and there's real light, and I don't care how bitter the situation that's illustrated, it's sort of comic strip whap and bang and pow, but red and yellow, and it had significant shapes. The artist knew how to manipulate the mind of the viewer with powerful, important moves that are beautiful, might show a ray of sunshine in the end. Not only that, we did some very, very deliberate things because we were all formally trained in art. And so the principles that we may have learned in our institution that we were schooled, we reversed them. We deliberately threw the light from the opposite angle, things that were supposed to broaden the light of this side of my garment. But next time I fooled you, I brought it in here. Mm-hmm. And at one point, we said everything we do should be deliberately disassociated with this formal training, but acceptable in its painterly and structurally done garments and paintings. We did these things just so you'd recognize AfriCOBRA, but they're so well done until you don't see the reverse of the lighting, the reverse of the size delineation. You sort of wonder, where is the mistake? And I have to share a secret. Carolyn was getting some paintings photographed, and it was about a couple of years ago. And she said, I don't want to use this one because this light is, I have to work on this. This light is coming from the wrong direction. And some of this is happening that she, realized because she is an educator and a painter, that some of the deliberate things that you had really recognized in the painting sort of forgot the fact that we deliberately did that. But we... And I said, don't worry about it, Carolyn. We wanted to do that. Remember? But
so
I
you
just
didn't
thought
correct it?
Yeah, no, she didn't correct it. You might be looking at it now. But I just thought that was wonderful because it went unnoticed. But we all were smug and we sort of knew this stuff we were doing, But it was to give a signature to our work. And that we can do beautiful without it being all these rules. That we can speak to our people in a way of joy and uplift and power and hopefully glory.
Yeah, thank you. Did anybody else want to respond to that, Gerald? Or do you want to move on to?
She said it all.
She said it all. No, she did. So one of the things I wanted to ask you all about has to do with how you balance the weight and influence of the 60s, right? The late 60s period, AfriCOBRA, all of that wonderfulness, right? With what you're up to now. I have talked with several of you and other artists in the last couple of days about your ongoing practices, being in the studio, So I know something about Jae and Wadsworth studio. Jae was describing that to me. Gerald, I know you've got your house studio. Carolyn,
Life is beautiful.
Life is beautiful. They've got, these studio practices are happening now. You were, in the studio this week, yesterday, that sort of thing. And so how are you all negotiating, again, the weight of that 60s, 70s AfriCOBRA period with what is happening now in your studio? And I guess one of the ways to think about that is formally what's shifted in the work. Gerald, you told me a wonderful story about Barbara Jones, that the work that she was doing recently, or more recently, in the last 10 years, is actually quite different from the work that she was making in the 60s, which is normal. But can you all say something about either the evolution of your practices, what's happening in the studio now, or whether or not it's a continuation of what we see on the screen and in the galleries?
Well, I started pretty much talking about rage and that period when, it just becomes part of your psyche. And lo, these many years later, you learn how not to get mad. because it all, it all passes. And I've become more introspective in my work and more spiritual, more meditative and contemplative and thoughtful in the work that I do now. The slides that are in the loop now, they go back to 70, I think 72 is the latest one, which contain the word live, that was kind of inspired by the Marvin Gaye song, Live, the phrase, live for the life, but let live everybody, part of his major album. That's how I see the world, that live for the life. It's very short.
Does that show up formally in some way?
I want to add something. If you ever was an AfriCOBRA member, it's sort of infectious. You really want for life, even though you're not. You might have resigned from it years ago, but the philosophy we formed and all is still ingrained in you. So, but if you're doing something, making art, if you see the world and you're 30 years old, and if you're 80 and you still see the same thing, something's wrong. I mean, everybody, you have to change with time. You're human, you can't continue to do the same things over and over, So you become a cartoon of yourself.
No, I think it's really important, and this showed up in the prefatory comments also. This is not just about a sort of unvaulting of this work. These are makers who have been active, right, over these decades and are still active. So again, sort of, I think this is something we should pay attention to, is the evolution of the practice, what's going on in the studios now. And I'm really curious about some of the formal shifts, since there's been so much attention. There was so much attention, as Jae was mentioning, in sort of some of the formal ways to work with and resist some of the trainings, how you were trained in terms of formal methods. Absolutely. So I have another question, and I think it might be kind of in our wind down phase. But there are many wonderful didactics, ways of knowing about your work at the moment, lots of books coming out and shows and that sort of thing. There is the Soul of a Nation book, which is really, really incredible and informative. But I have a question for you all. In addition to all of those knowledge pieces, those framings, what have those of us who frame things in different ways, I won't say gotten wrong, but what would you like to add to what other people have done? What would you want to say? What has been forgotten? What has been missed? I know, Wadsworth, you're writing a book, right?
Yes,
so
I've written it.
You've written the book. So what will that contribute to all of this story that we don't know from the other efforts?
Well, the book is very, it's just a report of what we did, but it's narrative too. It also has conversation. It has conversation in the meetings, and it's very informative and it's very comprehensive. Just how we talked in meetings and how AfriCOBRA was formed, really. So it's in Duke University Press, and it's working through the system now. They're putting it together.
Okay.
And I don't know when it'll be out yet. They haven't told me.
Right, but it sounds like one of the things you're contributing is a very different writerly style, if it's more of a report and there are discussions or dialogues or that sort of thing. So,
well, there's things that other people couldn't know unless you were there, So, the whole thing is it's a lot of stuff written by historians about AfriCOBRA, but then a lot of it is not really true, you know. You know, it's sort of, you know. and even some of the members have written some things that the same way, sort of, you know. Anyway.
Yeah, there need to be lots of voices, obviously, but again, part of what I'm saying is I think we started at this place too. We value your voice in all of this as well. Jae, Gerald, Carolyn?
I just simply, to add to that, would say the rarity of artists living this long and being accessible means that we're open for inquiry and for invitations and audience. We're that kind of group. And you could feel that you could contact us and we'd be most willing to share. Please, when doing projects, don't just blindly fill in the blanks. Give us a call. We still have a land phone.
And an answering machine.
We have a land phone, and Wadsworth adds an answering machine
Got an answering
that
machine on it.
rolls on. You can chat for the longest, and we hear it, and we take down that number. We give you a call back.
The phones got their own answering machine, but we nullified by hooking up the old one we have, the loud one, you know. And when it comes on, if we're in the kitchen, we crack the door and see if we want to answer it or not.
Gerald?
Well, I think we've taken a short look back 50 years ago. And it always begs the question, you know, what is the next 50 years going to look like? You know, given the reality of life, you know, a lot of us may not be around. But where is this evolutionary process going to take us 50 years from now? There are young people who study AfriCOBRA in formal classrooms, and you know, I get requests for interviews and from somebody writing a thesis or a dissertation, and I try to be helpful, but they eventually will be writing and speaking about maybe not just us, but some other artists out there who were influenced and helped to carry forth the name and the traditions and principles and goals and ideas that we helped to bring forth.
Right. So as people who help to bring forth some notion of a Black aesthetic, what would you see for that in 50 years? What happens to the Black aesthetic fast forward 50 years?
Hey,
It's been done.
I am who I am and gonna be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We are the people who are our children and grow and start their lives, but their Blackness is gonna keep on, keeping on. So that's an important thing to articulate and to understand your if anything, really look at who are your founders, who is your family way back, what can you learn? But just like we research different nationalities, we should explore more and bring more beauty to our conditions and to ourselves.
One final thing I want to say is, we're talking about work was created 40, 50 years ago. And you sort of, the early AfriCOBRA work is most things people are interested in. And I was in AfriCOBRA for 30 years. And there was a big transformation in my style of work. And, you know, much different from what you're looking at here, what's on the screen now. But nobody's interested in the work you're doing today. So you keeping the artists really stuck in the 60s. But I understand history, but this is what's happening with all of the exhibits and everything we have. And it's
that's
all
why I asked you
about
that
50
question.
years ago what
I
you
got
did.
it, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's not about what you did yesterday, last month.
No,
You know?
I asked about that because we wanted, I think it's important to know what you're working on in the studio. You all have studios and you're in them all the time.
I was just telling somebody this morning about if you go to a concert of one of your favorites, and at the end of it, everybody's screaming for something that was popular years ago.
Yeah.
And the musicians will say, I don't do that anymore.
Right.
So that's pretty much the state of you know, how things have developed, you know. I look at older work and I say, boy, that worked then, why not go back if it, you know, if it worked. But I think you learn and develop and grow, and you know, like Wadsworth said, something's wrong if you're still doing the same.
Yeah, Carolyn, do you want to respond to that in any way?
Well, I think what I will do, or continue to do, is to take a closer look at the family and the togetherness of the family. The way I looked at my relatives and family members back in the 60s, I saw different qualities in them. I saw different vulnerabilities in them. But now with age, I just have this immense appreciation for what they did. I had no concept as to how much help, how much nurturing they were doing all along the way. Of course, like younger people, you want to please, you want to make them proud of you, you want to be worthy of their investment, but I just didn't fully encompass what was really going on. And so through my work, I'd like to give them the tribute that they so wonderfully deserved, as far as what they put in me, my sister, my cousins, and my cousins and I were reared like sisters and brothers, and I can see that there was a conscious attempt to keep us together, to have us growing up, to have us doing things together. And several of them, a lot of them are there. And my husband and I are up in Chicago, and we've retired. And we desire to go back to be with those cousins because we've shared so much of our lives together. And we feel a little left alone and unsupported. You know, even though we've made our money, we've had our jobs, we've have friends that have come and gone, but there now is the desire to go back home. And no matter how humble home is, you never feel as if you should be somewhere else and not home. So I'm looking forward to having more retirement years in the same house that I grew up in. And so we're going back and forth to Houston to renovate and to update things, and so that I can enjoy painting. I just love painting, and the drawings that I'm doing are in support of the paintings. So someone asked me, well, what legacy do you want to leave? I don't want to worry about legacy. I almost want another lifetime, but but not with the suffering, but with the lessons I've learned. And I wish to have just some more time.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. I mean, I think we have to end, but the family is a wonderful, a really poignant manifestation of the social, as was Obasi, the Organization of Black American Culture, as was AfriCOBRA, all of these sort of manifestations of the social. And I think you all being here together in the spirit of collaboration and collectivity on stage, doing this 50 years later together, not individuated, is also a wonderful manifestation of the social and how it plays into arts practice. Thank you. All right. Thanks, you guys. All right.